water fuel injector, as I've shown you, now gives us the abilities to transport the water directly to the fuel injector.
In the annals of controversial inventions, few have sparked as much debate as Stanley Meyer's water-powered car. Imagine a world where vehicles run on nothing but water. No gasoline, no emissions, just plain H2O. This wasn't a sci-fi fantasy, but the bold claim of an Ohio inventor who in the 1990s demonstrated a dune buggy he said could cross the United States on 22 gallons of water.
We have calculated that if we take the dune buggy from Los Angeles to New York, we would roughly use 22 gallons of water.
Meyer's water fuel cell became the stuff of legend, especially after his sudden death in 1998 while dining at a restaurant. One moment he was celebrating a potential deal with Belgian investors, the next he was clutching his throat, rushing outside and collapsing. His final words, "They poisoned me." But who was they and what really happened on that fateful day? Before we dive into the controversy that would define his legacy, let's get to know the man behind the water-powered car phenomenon. Stanley Allen Meyer wasn't born into the spotlight. His story begins in a modest home in Grove City, Ohio, where he was born on August 24, 1940. Growing up in America's heartland during the post-war boom, Meyer witnessed firsthand the nation's growing dependence on fossil fuels and the economic vulnerability that came with it. Unlike many inventors with revolutionary claims, Meyer didn't follow a traditional scientific education path. He never obtained a doctorate or even a bachelor's degree in engineering. Instead, he was largely self-taught, with a background that included service in the military and work as an electronics technician. This lack of formal credentials would later be used by critics to question his credibility, but it also painted him as an outsider, a garage inventor unbound by conventional thinking. What Meyer lacked in formal education, he made up for with an insatiable curiosity and mechanical aptitude. Friends and family described him as someone who was always tinkering, taking things apart to understand how they worked, and envisioning ways to improve them. From an early age, he displayed an uncanny ability to visualize complex systems and mechanisms, often sketching his ideas on whatever paper was available. The 1970s energy crisis became a pivotal moment in Meyer's life. As Americans waited in long lines at gas stations and witnessed the economic impact of OPEC's oil embargo, Meyer began questioning the fundamental nature of energy production and consumption. There has to be a better way, he reportedly told his twin brother Stephen during this time. This crisis didn't just inconvenience Meyer, it inspired him. By the early 1980s, Meyer had turned his full attention to developing alternative energy solutions. Working from his home workshop, he began experimenting with electrolysis, the process of using electricity to split water into hydrogen and oxygen. But Meyer wasn't content with conventional electrolysis, which consumes more energy than the hydrogen it produces could generate. He believed he could break those rules, and by 1989, he was ready to show the world his creation. A water fuel cell that he claimed could produce enough hydrogen to power a car while consuming far less electricity than conventional science said was possible.
So the fuel now coming from the water through the electrical polarization process going into resonance meaning that we're actually tuning into the dielectric properties of water.
The water fuel cell. Explained to understand the controversy surrounding Stanley Meyer, we need to look under the hood of his claimed invention. The water fuel cell, as Meyer described it, was revolutionary in its apparent simplicity, yet mind-boggling in its implications for physics as we know it. At its core, Meyer's device was an advanced form of water electrolysis, a process discovered over 200 years ago. Traditional electrolysis uses electricity to split water, H2O, into its component parts, hydrogen and oxygen. This is basic chemistry taught in high schools worldwide. The hydrogen can then be burned as fuel, releasing energy. The catch? It takes more electricity to split the water than you get back when you burn the hydrogen. That's where Meyer claimed his breakthrough changed everything. According to Meyer, his water fuel cell could split water using significantly less energy than conventional electrolysis. So little, in fact, that the hydrogen produced would generate more energy than was initially input. This would create, in essence, a perpetual motion machine of sorts. something that violates the first and second laws of thermodynamics, which state that energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. How did Maya claim to achieve this seemingly impossible feat? His patents and demonstrations described specialized electrical circuits that created high-voltage pulses at specific frequencies. These pulses, Maya explained, would resonate with the water molecules in a way that weakened the bonds between hydrogen and oxygen atoms, making them easier to separate with minimal energy input. Maya's cell consisted of stainless steel rods, electrodes, arranged as concentric cylinders, separated by a gap through which water flowed. Rather than using dissolved electrolytes to increase conductivity, as in conventional electrolysis, Maya used pure tap water. He claimed his circuit applied a pulsating DC voltage across the electrodes using a complex arrangement of inductors, transformers, and rectifiers. The produced gas, which Maya called hydroxy gas, was then directed to the engine's intake system. In his demonstrations, Maya showed a converted dune buggy that appeared to run solely on water. Viewers would watch as he disconnected the battery after starting the engine, seemingly proving the system was self-sustaining once running. Perhaps most remarkably, Maya asserted that his dune buggy could cross the continental United States on just 22 gallons of water, about 1/10 the amount of gasoline a typical car would require. If true, this would have represented not just an incremental improvement in efficiency, but a quantum leap beyond anything known to modern engineering. Maya didn't stop at automotive applications. He envisioned his technology powering homes, aircraft, and even spacecraft. He spoke of a future where energy was essentially free, pollution was eliminated, and the geopolitical power structures built around oil would dissolve. It was a utopian vision that captivated the imagination of many who heard it. Too good to be true. When something challenges our fundamental understanding of how the universe works, skepticism isn't just natural, it's necessary. Maya's water fuel cell didn't just push the boundaries of known science, it seemed to break them entirely. Let's examine why the scientific community largely rejected Maya's claims and what that tells us about his invention. The laws of thermodynamics aren't just scientific theories, they're among the most thoroughly tested and verified principles in physics. The first law states that energy cannot be created or destroyed, only converted from one form to another. The second law states that in any energy conversion, some energy is always lost to entropy. These principles have withstood over 150 years of scientific scrutiny. For Maya's device to work as claimed, these fundamental laws would need to be incorrect. Professor Ernest Stockstad from MIT, who reviewed Maya's patents at the request of a science journal in 1995, didn't mince words. What Maya describes is simply impossible without violating the most basic laws of physics. Water doesn't contain excess energy that can be extracted without putting that energy in first. The process of conventional electrolysis is well understood. It requires a minimum of 237.1 kilojoules of energy to split 1 mole of water. This is a thermodynamic requirement, not a technological limitation. Any device claiming to split water with significantly less energy input is, according to our understanding of physics, claiming to create energy from nothing. When journalists or potential investors asked to have independent scientists verify Maya's claims, he typically refused, citing concerns about intellectual property theft. While protecting one's invention is understandable, this refusal prevented the kind of peer review that legitimizes scientific claims. Some who examined Maya's demonstrations noted potential flaws in his setup. For instance, a battery was always used to start the engine, and some speculated that hidden power sources could have been powering the system. The complex circuit designs in his patents were criticized for containing elements that seemed unnecessary for their stated purpose but perfect for concealing the actual energy consumption. In one telling incident, 3 witnesses hired by an investor observed Maya's demonstration and reported that the current drawn from the battery never decreased while the engine was running, contradicting Maya's claim that his system was self-sustaining once started. Maya often responded to scientific criticism by claiming that conventional science simply couldn't explain his discovery yet. He compared himself to the Wright brothers, who flew before aerodynamic theory could fully explain how their aircraft worked. It's a compelling narrative, the innovative outsider whose practical success outpaces theoretical understanding. However, there's a crucial difference. The Wright brothers' plane didn't violate the laws of physics. It worked in harmony with them, even if those laws weren't fully understood at the time. Myers claimed water fuel cell would require us to rewrite the foundations of thermodynamics, chemistry, and physics. Despite all this skepticism, some scientists remained open to the possibility that Meyer had discovered something novel, even if it wasn't what he claimed. Perhaps his cell was more efficient than standard electrolysis in some way, or perhaps he had stumbled upon an unknown catalytic process. But without rigorous, independent testing, these more modest possibilities could never be verified. Media sensation and public reaction. Despite scientific skepticism, Stanley Meyer and his water-powered car captured the public imagination in a way few inventors ever achieve. By the early 1990s, Meyer had become something of a celebrity in alternative energy circles, and his story began spreading beyond specialized publications into mainstream media. The image was undeniably compelling, a humble inventor from Ohio challenging both the scientific establishment and the powerful oil industry with nothing but ingenuity and a converted dune buggy. Local Ohio news stations were the first to cover Meyer's demonstrations, showing footage of his vehicle apparently running on water alone. These segments typically featured Meyer filling the car's tank with tap water, connecting briefly to a battery to start the engine, then disconnecting the battery while the engine continued to run. In 1995, Meyer received his biggest media exposure when CBS News featured his invention in a segment titled "It Runs on Water." The report, narrated by respected journalist Brit Hume, presented Meyer's claims with limited skepticism and reached millions of viewers across America. While the segment did include brief comments from scientists expressing doubt, the overall tone was one of fascination with the possibility that this Ohio inventor might have solved the world's energy problems. The timing of Meyer's rise to prominence couldn't have been more perfect for capturing public interest. The early 1990s saw growing environmental awareness, concerns about Middle Eastern oil dependency following the Gulf War, and increasing gas prices. The public was primed for a solution that promised both energy independence and environmental benefits. Letters poured into Meyer from around the world, from curious individuals, potential investors, and even government representatives from countries facing energy challenges. One letter, reportedly from a South Korean diplomat, offered funding for further development in exchange for licensing rights in Asia. Others came from regular people offering their life savings to be part of what they believed would be the energy revolution. The reaction wasn't universally positive, however. Online bulletin boards, the precursors to today's internet forums, became battlegrounds between believers and skeptics. Some accused Meyer of being a con artist preying on scientific illiteracy. Others defended him as a genius being suppressed by vested interests. This division foreshadowed the polarized internet debates that would become common in later decades. Meyer cultivated a particular following among those already distrustful of mainstream institutions. His talks at alternative energy conferences often included references to oil company suppression and government collusion. "They don't want you to have free energy," he would tell audiences who responded with knowing nods. For people already suspicious of corporate power, Meyer's story confirmed their worldview. Perhaps the most telling aspect of the public reaction was how Meyer became a projection screen for hopes and fears about technology and power. To environmentalists, he represented a clean energy future. To libertarians, freedom from utility companies. To conspiracy theorists, proof of corporate suppression of innovation. By 1998, Meyer had developed a core of dedicated supporters who helped spread his message. They distributed VHS tapes of his demonstrations, photocopied his technical papers, and organized community meetings to discuss his technology. This grassroots network ensured that even without major corporate backing, Meyer's ideas reached a global audience. Legal battles and controversies. As Meyer's fame grew, so did scrutiny of his claims. The mid-1990s saw him embroiled in legal challenges that would tarnish his reputation and raise questions about the authenticity of his invention. These battles weren't just about patents or business disputes. They struck at the core of Meyer's credibility. The most significant legal setback came in 1996 when Meyer was taken to court by two investors who had provided him with $25,000 to develop his technology. These investors, increasingly suspicious about the lack of verifiable results, hired expert witnesses to evaluate Maya's demonstrations. What they found led them to file a lawsuit claiming fraud. The Fayette County, Ohio court case became a turning point in Maya's story. 3 expert witnesses testified they had observed Maya's demonstrations and concluded his fuel cell was nothing more than conventional electrolysis dressed up with unnecessarily complicated circuitry. Maya, they claimed, was misrepresenting standard electrolysis as a breakthrough technology. Judge Roger Hurley didn't equivocate in his ruling. After hearing evidence from both sides, he declared that Maya had committed gross and egregious fraud and ordered him to repay the $25,000 to his investors. The ruling stopped short of declaring the technology itself fraudulent, but made clear that Maya had misrepresented its capabilities to secure investment. Maya adamantly denied any wrongdoing and immediately announced he would appeal the decision. To his supporters, the court case was further evidence of a system rigged against revolutionary inventions. Maya himself suggested the proceedings had been influenced by oil industry interests, though he offered no specific evidence for this claim. Beyond the Ohio fraud case, Maya faced other legal challenges. The Patent Office repeatedly questioned elements of his applications, requiring numerous revisions before granting his patents. Critics pointed out that having a patent doesn't validate that an invention works. The Patent Office doesn't typically require working prototypes, but only that it represents a novel idea. Maya also engaged in cease and desist battles with skeptics who publicly criticized his technology. In one notable case, he threatened legal action against a science magazine that published an analysis calling his fuel cell pseudoscience. The magazine stood by its analysis, and Maya eventually dropped the threat without filing suit. Perhaps most damaging to Maya's credibility were the disputes with former associates. Several people who had initially worked with Maya later came forward with concerns about his methods. One former assistant claimed Maya would reconnect the battery to his demonstration vehicle when observers weren't looking. Another alleged that Maya had rejected valid scientific testing protocols that would have definitively proven or disproven his claims. Throughout these controversies, Maya maintained a consistent position. His technology worked exactly as claimed, and any suggestion otherwise was either misunderstanding or deliberate sabotage. He developed increasingly elaborate explanations for why traditional scientific testing couldn't properly evaluate his invention, arguing that standard measurement equipment wasn't capable of detecting the novel energy processes he had discovered. Maya's response to legal and scientific challenges revealed a pattern that troubled even some supporters. Rather than addressing specific criticisms with specific rebuttals, he often pivoted to broader conspiracies or technical explanations so complex they were difficult to follow, much less verify. The fateful day, March 20th, 1998. March 20th, 1998 began as a day of promise for Stanley Maya. After years of demonstrations, patent battles, and courting investors, he finally seemed on the verge of a significant breakthrough, not in his technology but in finding financial backing to bring it to the world. But by evening's end, Maya would be dead under circumstances that would fuel conspiracy theories for decades to come. That morning, Maya was in high spirits according to his twin brother Stephen. He had arranged a meeting with potential investors from Belgium who had expressed serious interest in funding the commercial development of his water fuel cell technology. After years of struggling to find large-scale investment, this meeting represented a potential turning point. Maya spent the morning reviewing his presentation materials and checking the demonstration models he planned to show. The meeting itself, held at a small hotel in Grove City, apparently went well. While no contracts were signed, the Belgian visitors indicated they wanted to move forward with discussions. Maya called several associates afterward, describing the meeting as very positive and suggesting a major deal might be imminent. Whether this optimism was justified or part of Maya's tendency toward positive thinking remains unclear, as the Belgian investors later declined to comment on the specifics of their discussions. To celebrate the promising meeting, Maya invited his brother Stephen and 2 Belgian investors to dinner at a local restaurant, the Cracker Barrel. The group arrived around 6:30 p.m. and was seated near the rear of the restaurant. According to witness accounts, the conversation during the first part of the meal was animated and positive, focusing on the potential applications of Myers' technology and the next steps in their business relationship. The meal proceeded normally until coffee was served. Stephen Meyer would later recall that his brother took a sip from his cup, then clutched his throat and rushed outside, clearly in distress. The others at the table, initially confused by his sudden exit, quickly followed. They found Stanley in the parking lot, on his knees and struggling to breathe. "They poisoned me," Meyer reportedly gasped to his brother before collapsing completely. Stephen immediately called for emergency assistance. Paramedics arrived within minutes and found Meyer unconscious, but still alive. They performed CPR and rushed him to Grant Medical Center. Despite their efforts, Stanley Meyer was pronounced dead at 7:40 p.m., little more than an hour after his first sip of coffee. The suddenness of Meyer's collapse and his disturbing final words immediately raised questions. Who were they that Meyer believed had poisoned him? Was it the investors? Someone else in the restaurant? Or was it the panicked statement of a man experiencing a medical emergency? The restaurant staff was questioned by police, as were the Belgian investors. All expressed shock at the sudden turn of events. The coffee cup and remaining food items from the table were collected for testing. The investors, who had planned to stay several more days, changed their flights and returned to Belgium within 24 hours, raising suspicions among Meyer's supporters. News of Meyer's death spread quickly through the alternative energy community. By the next morning, his home and workshop were sealed by police as a potential crime scene. Supporters gathered outside, some bringing flowers, others demanding answers. Local news crews arrived to cover what was quickly becoming a sensational story. The inventor of a water-powered car dead under mysterious circumstances after claiming he was poisoned. Official investigation results. In the wake of Meyer's shocking death, local authorities launched what they described as a thorough investigation. Given Meyer's final words and the unusual circumstances, police initially treated the case as a possible homicide. But what did the official investigation actually find, and why did so many remain unsatisfied with its conclusions? The Franklin County Coroner's Office conducted an autopsy on Meyer's body the day after his death. Dr. William R. Adrian, the pathologist who performed the examination, found that Meyer had died from a cerebral aneurysm, a weakening and rupture of a blood vessel in the brain. According to the autopsy report, this aneurysm had likely been present for some time before it suddenly ruptured, causing the rapid decline Meyer experienced at the restaurant. The report noted no evidence of poisoning or any suspicious substances in Meyer's system. Toxicology tests came back negative for common poisons, drugs, or other foreign substances that might have triggered the aneurysm. The coroner concluded that Meyer's death, while sudden and unexpected, was due to natural causes. Police investigation of the restaurant scene yielded similarly unremarkable results. Interviews with restaurant staff revealed nothing unusual about Meyer's meal preparation or service. The Belgian investors were questioned separately, and their accounts of the evening matched those of other witnesses. After reviewing the evidence, police officially classified Meyer's death as due to natural causes and closed their criminal investigation approximately 2 weeks after his death. The Grove City Police Department issued a brief statement. While we understand the concerns raised by Mr. Meyer's final statement, our thorough investigation found no evidence of foul play. Medical evidence indicates he suffered a cerebral aneurysm, a natural, though unfortunate, medical event. For many, especially those in medical and law enforcement fields, the explanation seemed reasonable. Cerebral aneurysms can remain asymptomatic until they rupture, at which point they cause exactly the kind of sudden, catastrophic symptoms Meyer displayed. The stress of an important business meeting, combined with the excitement of potential success, could have contributed to raising his blood pressure, potentially triggering the rupture of an already weakened blood vessel. Meyer's family received the official reports with mixed reactions. His twin brother Stephen initially expressed doubts, pointing to Stanley's good health and his disturbing final words. However, when pressed about alternative theories, he acknowledged he had no specific evidence of foul play beyond his brother's dying statement. Some questioned why more extensive toxicology tests weren't performed to look for rare or unusual poisons that might not appear in standard screenings. The coroner's office responded that their testing followed all standard protocols and that Maya's symptoms and physical findings were consistent with an aneurysm rather than poisoning. Questions were also raised about the rapid departure of the Belgian investors. Police reported that they had cooperated fully with the investigation before leaving and had provided contact information should further questions arise. Their hasty return to Belgium was attributed to the shock of the events and a desire to distance themselves from what was quickly becoming a contentious situation. Perhaps most tellingly, no one who was with Maya that evening, including his brother Stephen, reported seeing anyone approach their table or tamper with Maya's food or drink. The alleged poisoning, if it occurred, would have had to happen either in the kitchen, where many staff would have been involved, or at the table, where it likely would have been witnessed. The conspiracy theories emerge with Maya gone and his water fuel cell never independently verified. One might have expected his story to fade into obscurity. Instead, his death became the catalyst for an explosion of conspiracy theories that have persisted and evolved for over 2 decades. What makes these theories so compelling to so many people, and what evidence do they cite? The most prevalent theory centers on Maya's dying words. "They poisoned me." Proponents argue that they referred to agents of the oil industry or government entities who saw Maya's technology as a threat to their power and profits. According to this theory, Maya was assassinated just as he was on the verge of bringing his water-powered car technology to the worldwide market. This narrative found fertile ground in the existing mythology around suppressed energy technologies. Maya's supporters quickly connected his death to other stories of allegedly suppressed inventions, from Nikola Tesla's claimed free energy devices to rumored 200 mpg carburetors supposedly bought and shelved by auto manufacturers. Maya's case seemed to fit a pattern they already believed existed. The timing of Maya's death, right after a promising meeting with investors, features prominently in conspiracy narratives. Why, supporters ask, would Maya be killed precisely when he was about to secure funding? The answer, they suggest, is that this represented the moment of greatest threat to established energy interests. As long as Maya was struggling to commercialize his invention, he could be dismissed as a garage tinkerer. With serious financial backing, he might have become unstoppable. Questions about the Belgian investors became central to many conspiracy theories. Who were these men? Were they genuine investors or plants sent to gain Maya's trust? Some theories suggested they might have been operatives for oil companies or intelligence agencies. The investors' quick departure after Maya's death was interpreted as flight rather than a natural response to a traumatic situation. Other theories focused on the autopsy findings. Some claim that certain poisons can trigger aneurysms or create symptoms that mimic them. These theorists pointed to substances like sodium fluoroacetate, a rare poison that wouldn't appear in standard toxicology screens. The fact that Maya's tissue samples weren't tested for every possible exotic poison became, in these narratives, evidence of a cover-up rather than standard medical procedure. The internet, still in its relative infancy in 1998, played a crucial role in the spread and evolution of these conspiracy theories. Early websites dedicated to Maya's work became virtual gathering places where supporters shared information, speculations, and supposed evidence. Without the fact-checking mechanisms of traditional media, alternative narratives flourished online. Some of the more elaborate conspiracy theories connected Maya's death to broader alleged conspiracies involving energy suppression, claiming that his case was just one example of a systematic effort to prevent humanity from accessing free or abundant energy. Names like the Energy Cartel or the Oil Consortium were used to describe the shadowy forces allegedly responsible. Documents that appeared online after Maya's death purported to be leaked evidence of surveillance of Maya by government agencies. While the authenticity of these documents has never been verified, they further fueled suspicions among those already inclined to believe in a conspiracy. Perhaps most compelling to conspiracy adherents was the simple question: if Maya's technology was worthless pseudoscience, why would anyone bother to kill him? This question, rooted in the assumption that Maya was indeed murdered, created a logical trap. Either his technology worked and was therefore threatening enough to warrant assassination, or the conspiracy theories were unfounded. Examining the evidence with passionate believers on one side and dismissive skeptics on the other, finding the truth about Stanley Meyer requires carefully sifting through the available evidence. Let's examine the facts we know for certain against the claims made by both supporters and critics. First, let's look at the evidence supporting the possibility of foul play. Meyer's dying words, "They poison me," remain the strongest suggestion that his death wasn't natural. Coming from the victim himself, these words carry emotional weight, especially given the context of Meyer's previous claims about threats and suppression. Meyer had indeed reported receiving threats prior to his death. In interviews and at conferences, he occasionally mentioned threatening phone calls warning him to stop his work. However, no records exist of Meyer filing police reports about these alleged threats, making them difficult to verify independently. The timing of Meyer's death, just as he appeared to be making progress with investors, does raise questions. If his technology was real and threatening to established industries, this would indeed have been a logical moment for intervention. The sudden departure of the Belgian investors after his death has also fueled suspicion, though this could equally be explained as a normal reaction to a traumatic event. Some have pointed to the missing or destroyed technical documents from Meyer's home after his death as evidence of a cover-up. While some materials did disappear, court records show that many of Meyer's devices and documents were taken by family members for safekeeping or claimed by various associates who believed they had rights to them, creating a more mundane explanation for their dispersal. Now let's examine the evidence against the conspiracy theories. The medical evidence for a cerebral aneurysm is strong. The autopsy findings were consistent with this diagnosis, and Meyer's symptoms, sudden severe headache, collapse, rapid deterioration, match the typical presentation of an aneurysm rupture. Cerebral aneurysms are not uncommon, affecting approximately 3% of the population, with many undiagnosed until rupture. No physical evidence of poisoning was found despite toxicology testing. While conspiracy theorists argue that exotic poisons might have been used that wouldn't show up in standard tests, medical experts point out that such poisons would typically leave other traceable evidence in tissue samples or produce symptoms different from those Meyer experienced. The logistics of poisoning Meyer at a public restaurant present significant practical challenges. The poisoner would have needed to know which table Meyer would be seated at, which cup he would use, and ensure that no one else at the table accidentally consumed the poison. Such an operation would be extraordinarily risky and complex. Perhaps most tellingly, no one has ever come forward with credible, first-hand knowledge of a plot against Meyer. Despite the passing of over 2 decades and the death of many who might have been involved in any conspiracy, no deathbed confessions or leaked documents with verifiable provenance have emerged. Looking at Meyer's technology itself, no independent researcher has successfully replicated his claimed results in the years since his death, despite numerous attempts. While supporters argue this is due to missing critical information, the scientific consensus remains that the water fuel cell, as described by Meyer, contradicts fundamental laws of physics. The court ruling against Meyer for gross and egregious fraud prior to his death also weighs against the conspiracy narrative. If Meyer was misrepresenting his technology to investors, as the court found, it undermines the premise that his invention was revolutionary enough to warrant deadly suppression. The scientific community's verdict. In the years following Meyer's death, numerous scientists, engineers, and independent researchers have examined his claims, patents, and demonstrations. Their collective assessment provides valuable insight into whether Meyer truly discovered a revolutionary energy source or was promoting something else entirely. The mainstream scientific community has remained largely consistent in its evaluation of Meyer's water fuel cell. Dr. Michael Lawton, Professor of Electrical Engineering at Queen Mary University of London, reviewed Meyer's patents in 2002 and concluded, Meyer's claims violate the first and second laws of thermodynamics. There's simply no way to extract more energy from water than is required to split it without an additional energy source. This fundamental thermodynamic problem remains the most significant scientific objection to Meyer's claimed technology. Water is not a fuel in the traditional sense. It's an end product of combustion. Hydrogen, which can be extracted from water through electrolysis, is indeed a fuel, but the energy required to separate it from oxygen exceeds the energy released when it's burned. This isn't a technological limitation but a fundamental property of water's chemical bonds. Several universities have conducted controlled tests of systems similar to Maya's, attempting to replicate his claimed results using his patent descriptions. A notable study at MIT in 2005 built a cell based on Maya's patents and measured its energy input and output. The researchers found no evidence of excess energy production. The cell consumed more electricity than the resulting hydrogen could theoretically produce when burned. Dr. Ernest Stockstad, who had evaluated Maya's claims before his death, published a comprehensive analysis in the Journal of Scientific Exploration in 2000. He noted, while Maya's patents are filled with novel terminology and complex circuits, when stripped to their essentials, they describe nothing more than conventional electrolysis dressed in non-standard language. The resonance, he describes, has no measurable effect on the energy efficiency of water splitting. Proponents of Maya's work have argued that these evaluations miss crucial elements of his technology, that scientists trying to replicate it don't understand the specific resonant frequencies or circuit designs needed. However, when pressed for details on these supposedly critical factors, supporters have been unable to provide specific, testable parameters that would allow for successful replication. Some defenders of Maya's work have pointed to certain anomalies observed in some replications, such as unusual gas production rates or electrode behaviors. However, independent researchers have attributed these to known phenomena like the formation of peroxides, measurement errors, or the effects of impurities in the water rather than novel energy processes. The Patent Office's granting of patents to Maya is often cited by supporters as validation of his claims. However, patent examiners do not verify that inventions actually work as described. They primarily assess whether the invention is novel and non-obvious compared to existing patents. Many devices that violate physical laws have received patents throughout history. It's worth noting that while the scientific consensus has remained skeptical, there has been legitimate scientific interest in Maya's work. Several research groups investigating hydrogen production have examined his patents for potentially useful insights into electrode design or circuit configurations, even while rejecting his overarching claims about energy efficiency. Dr. Valerie Thompson, a materials scientist who studied Maya's electrode designs, noted in a 2007 paper, while Maya's energy claims are unsupported by evidence, some of his electrode configurations show interesting properties that might be applicable to conventional electrolysis optimization. Innovation can sometimes emerge even from flawed theoretical frameworks. Similar cases in pattern recognition. Stanley Maya wasn't the first inventor to claim a revolutionary energy breakthrough, die under disputed circumstances, and become the center of conspiracy theories. Looking at similar cases reveals interesting patterns that may help us better understand the Maya phenomenon. Perhaps the most frequently cited parallel is Nikola Tesla, whose claimed free energy technologies were never fully realized. While Tesla died of natural causes at age 86, conspiracy theories persist that his most revolutionary ideas were suppressed and his papers seized by the government after his death. Like Maya, Tesla was a largely self-taught inventor who worked outside mainstream scientific institutions and claimed discoveries that violated conventional understanding of physics. More directly comparable is Eugene Malov, an MIT-educated scientist who became a prominent advocate for cold fusion research after the Pons and Fleischmann controversy. Malova was murdered in 2004 during an apparent robbery at his home. Some in the alternative energy community immediately suggested his killing was related to his work, though police eventually arrested and convicted two men for the crime with no connection to energy industries.